And then we move on to a different phase of visual representation, which is illumination, illustrations of all the scenes of the apocalypse. So before we have these gathered codices of the text of Revelation that become illustrated, we don't have many, or if any, representation of the cycles of disaster or catastrophe. You notice, there's symbols that make sense that have become really powerful, Alpha and Omega, especially on grave markers, and then also of the Lamb representing Christ or shown with Christ in different mosaics, and Christ triumphant in that particular symbol. But the greater, more complicated scenes of catastrophe, of cataclysm, the pouring of the bowls of wrath, the opening of the seals and what comes forward, we don't have great visual representation of that until we have these books that are illustrated copies of the apocalypse. And the Trier Apocalypse is early, in fact, I think the earliest representation, the oldest surviving illustrated one we have of that. So it is a codex containing the Latin, the Vulgate Latin of Revelation. It's written in what's called the Carolingian uncial, so lowercase Latin in the Carolingian script, in a earlier phase than later styles. Provenance of this is unknown. You can guess from where the illustrations, how they look, what it might be. It's housed in Germany, of course, in Trier, and there are 74 illustrations. So the Trier Apocalypse, I'll just show you. So this is the Latin page, starting with chapter 8, verse 13. So it says, and I don't know how many of you have Latin, but I'll read it and maybe you can guess just from what I say, what it's saying. So et vidi et audivi, vocem unius aquile volantar per medium caeli dicenter voce magna why habitantibus in terra. So why might make you think, whoa, whoa, whoa. And that's exactly what's happening is somebody's saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's the Aquila, it's the eagle. So he sees, John the seer sees the eagle flying in the midst of the heaven, and he hears and sees it say, whoa, 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 to the inhabitants of the earth with a great voice. So that's the beginning of the scene, the page that I've borrowed to show you the Carolingian script of this particular Trier manuscript. Here we have a depiction then of Christ and the seven lampstands, and has a sword coming out of its mouth. This is when he first appears to speak to John of Patmos, right? And he's going to send a message to the churches on the earth. And so we see represented also the landscape of where John may be and where Asia Minor, perhaps the coastline of where the churches are going to receive this message. We also have here the 7 different churches represented, and John is busy writing the message that the Son of Man is giving him to give to the 7 different churches. Here we have now Christ seated on the throne, surrounded by the 4 different creatures. Then we have the torches, and in front, and this becomes also visually represented in lots of different ways, with great imagination, the sea of glass, or the crystal sea in front of the throne of God. So you see here now greater tackling of the quite bizarre language that I read to you at the very beginning of the session, right? Of the throne looking like a rainbow that looks like an emerald, or the glassy sea. What exactly is that? And these strange creatures, right? Now depicted with greater and greater detail as artists are interpreting them, sometimes quite literally, sometimes in a symbolic imagery, depicting them in this way. So that's the Trier apocalypse. Then we have the Bamberg apocalypse, and you've seen me draw some of these illuminations from this apocalypse before. So this is dating from the 11th century, and it includes both the book of Revelation and then a gospel lectionary, so readings from the gospels according for liturgy. It's called an Ottonian manuscript, coming after Carolingian, so under Otto dynasty, created, we know, actually in a scriptorium in Reichenau. So we have mostly monks working who are experts at copying and also illuminating together in a scriptorium over period of possibly 20 so years, in which we have 74 illustrations illustrating the apocalypse. So to give you an idea of that, here we have the Son of Man on the throne, and you'll see what looks like a codex with 7 seals. And then those who have come and approaching, the elders are coming, approaching, and throwing their crowns down. It looks like almost like they've detached their halos right from their heads and are throwing them down before the throne of Christ. And then you have John of Patmos looking up and beholding this vision, right? So here we have both the scene of the angel describing or explaining and John seeing, and then above what he is seeing of the throne. So you have the torches and or the bulls, the flaming bulls, and the elders throwing their crowns before the seat of Christ. Here's another, and this should be apparent to you after everything that I've been saying in the last couple of sessions, but this is depicted the great whore of Babylon, right? So she is seated on a beast of 7 heads, and she's holding a cup of abominations. She's dressed in purple and scarlet, sumptuously dressed, right? And here again, we have John of Patmos above this time, looking down. So it's interesting if you see the juxtaposition with what I just showed you, where he was looking up to the throne of God. Here, separated by this banner of text, John is now looking down with the angel pointing at the whore of Babylon and the beast upon which she rides. So this is quite a different tone that's being struck here, and also the direction of the visual and how that's being perceived by John of Patmos. And here's an interesting one also. It is the depiction of the Last Judgment. So we have trumpets sounding, we have Christ seated as the judge. And this you'll see in later and later Renaissance. And of course, it might call to mind that the great Last Judgment of Michelangelo, in which you have Christ at the very center and all the saints and angels, right? And those being judged descending below. And that becomes a motif in much later art in the centuries to come of the Last Judgment. Here we have represented the scrolls, and this is that strange passage in which it's quite a heavenly bureaucracy in which they open the Lamb's Book of Life, and also other books are opened in which they need to consult of what everyone has done, right? What each individual has done, and then there's all the mass of everyone who has ever died or lived standing, and you also have those who are dead. This looks like a scene from Michael Jackson's Thriller, where everybody's coming up out of the ground, and they're slightly pale green.
Who was in there?
And so they're coming up, and those who are not worthy are being thrown, and you see on the further lower right-hand side in chains, and what looks like a black pit. So this is the judgment of the dead, the Last Judgment. And you'll see this structure, right? This kind of framework for this particular scene repeated over and over again through Renaissance paintings and later of this particular scene.